She thought money bought silence. Judge Judy taught her the true price of arrogance. The entire family watched her empire fall. The air in the courtroom wasn't just heavy, it was a physical presence, pressing down on everyone, thick with the unspoken. You could feel the tension vibrating, a silent hum of indignation and fear, long before a word was even spoken. And then, there she was, standing tall and utterly unyielding. Eleanor Vance. A woman sculpted from expensive fabrics and an even more expensive, unshakable sense of superiority. Her tailored suit, crisp and unforgiving, seemed to mock the worn, tear-stained dress of the young woman beside her, Sarah Miller. This wasn't just a legal dispute. This was a war, laid bare, a brutal class conflict unfolding under the harsh fluorescent lights of Judge Judy's court. Eleanor, a matriarch who exuded the kind of quiet power that came from generations of inherited wealth and unquestioned authority, barely spared Sarah a glance. Her eyes, sharp and dismissive, swept over the courtroom as if assessing a new acquisition, finding it rather underwhelming. There was a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips, a silent declaration that she had already won, that this entire charade was merely a formality. And the audience, oh, they felt it. A collective gasp, a ripple of unease, as they recognized the villain in the room instantly. This wasn't just about a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. This was about unchecked power and the devastating arrogance that inevitably followed. Sarah, on the other hand, was a picture of raw vulnerability. Her shoulders were hunched, her gaze fixed on the floor, as if looking up might shatter the fragile remnants of her dignity. Every line of her body screamed defeat, betrayal, and a deep, soul-crushing humiliation. You could see the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the silent plea for someone, anyone, to truly see her pain. This woman had been cast out, not just from a home, but from a life she believed was hers, a family she had married into, and the quiet suffering in her stance was a stark, heartbreaking contrast to Eleanor's icy composure. Then, Judge Judy entered. Not with a bang, but with a chilling stillness that commanded instant, absolute silence. Her gaze, as always, was a weapon. It didn't just look. It dissected, it analyzed, it judged every fiber of your being. And as her eyes landed on Eleanor Vance, that faint, self-satisfied smirk on the older woman's face faltered, just for a millisecond. A tiny crack in the perfectly constructed facade. The air didn't just grow silent, it froze. Even the bailiff seemed to hold his breath. Everyone knew, in that gut-wrenching moment, that disaster was not just coming, it had already arrived. This was not going to be a simple case. This was going to be an unraveling. Judge Judy didn't speak immediately. She just watched them, letting the weight of her presence fill every corner of the room. It was a silence so profound, so dangerous, it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Then, her voice, a low rumble that cut through the quiet like a surgeon's scalpel. "All right, Mrs. Vance. You're here because you unilaterally decided your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Miller, no longer belonged in the home you purchased for your son. Is that correct?" Eleanor, recovering her composure with a practiced ease, puffed her chest slightly. "Your Honor, I provided a beautiful home for my son and his wife. A generous gift, I assure you. But certain expectations were not met. And when one's generosity is taken for granted, one must act. It's a matter of principle, really." She delivered the last words with a sigh, as if the burden of such noble principles was almost too much to bear. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. They knew that tone. That was the tone of someone who believed their principles were inherently superior, their actions justified by their wealth. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed, but her expression remained unreadable. "Expectations, Mrs. Vance? Pray tell, what exactly were these expectations that warranted rendering a young woman, the mother of your grandchildren, homeless?" The question hung in the air, deceptively calm, yet loaded with an unspoken threat. Eleanor chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Well, Your Honor, David, my son, is a very successful man. He deserves a partner who reflects that success, who elevates the family name. Sarah, bless her heart, simply couldn't keep up. She struggled with the social obligations, the charity events, maintaining the household to our standards. It was becoming an embarrassment. The word embarrassment dripped with disdain, hitting Sarah like a physical blow. Sarah flinched, biting her lip so hard she tasted blood. The murmurs from the gallery grew louder, a wave of collective outrage beginning to build. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice, didn't even twitch, but her gaze hardened, freezing Eleanor in place. An embarrassment? You consider the mother of your grandchildren an embarrassment because she couldn't juggle your social obligations with raising children? Is that what you're telling this court, Mrs. Vance? The judge's tone had shifted. It was still quiet, but now there was a razor-sharp edge to it, a cold, dangerous clarity that made Eleanor pause. Eleanor, sensing a slight pushback but still confident in her untouchable status, simply smiled, a condescending, patronizing smile. Your Honor, in our world, appearances matter. My son, David, has a reputation to uphold. And frankly, Sarah simply wasn't cutting it. She preferred to stay home with the children, which is lovely, but not what's required for a woman in David's position. It became clear she wasn't a good fit. She emphasized fit with a delicate hand gesture, as if describing a mismatched piece of furniture. A wave of outrage swept through the courtroom. How dare she dismiss a mother's role so casually? How dare she equate human beings with accessories? Not a good fit, Judge Judy repeated slowly, her voice a low growl. And so, you decided, in your infinite wisdom and without consulting anyone, that she should be summarily ejected from her home. Is that the summation of your principle, Mrs. Vance? There was a dangerous calm in the judge's voice now, a predator's stillness before the strike. Eleanor, oblivious, nodded. Precisely, Your Honor. I merely exercised my right as the property owner to remove an undesirable tenant. After all, it is my property. The courtroom went absolutely silent. The air crackled. Every single person in that room understood the chilling implication. Eleanor Vance saw Sarah, her daughter-in-law, not as family, not as a person, but as a tenant. And undesirable at that. It was a moment of shocking dehumanization. Sarah finally lifted her head, her eyes wide with a mixture of pain and disbelief. Even the bailiff's jaw tightened. Judge Judy leaned forward, her elbows on the bench, her gaze like ice. Property owner, you say? So you consider your son, David, also merely a tenant in your life? Do you consider your grandchildren assets to be managed? Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it filled the room, reverberating with an intensity that made the hair on people's necks stand up. Eleanor's smug expression wavered for the first time. The judge wasn't just questioning her actions, she was dissecting her entire worldview. Of course not, Your Honor, Eleanor scoffed, trying to regain her footing. David is my son, my flesh and blood, and my grandchildren are precious to me. Precious enough to see their mother thrown out onto the street. Judge Judy shot back, the question like a direct hit. Precious enough to cause such upheaval and distress in their lives, all because their mother wasn't socially active enough for your liking? Eleanor flushed, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fray. It was for David's good, and for the children's. They deserve stability, a life free from drama. She glared at Sarah, as if Sarah herself was the source of all the drama. Drama that you created, Mrs. Vance, with your impulsive, self-serving actions, Judge Judy countered, her voice now a low, chilling reprimand. Tell me, did you ever consider the emotional impact of kicking a mother out of her home, divorcing her from her husband and children without a single thought for their well-being? Or did you just assume your money would somehow cushion the blow? The bluntness of the question, the direct accusation of moral bankruptcy, caused a collective gasp in the gallery. This wasn't just about legality anymore, it was about morality, about basic human decency. Eleanor, visibly rattled, tried to pivot. Your Honor, I offered Sarah a generous settlement. a substantial sum to ensure she was comfortable. She refused it, of course. Stubborn, ungrateful girl. She waved a dismissive hand, as if Sarah's refusal was further proof of her unreasonableness. A settlement, Judge Judy echoed, her voice laced with incredulity. So, you believe you can simply buy people off? Buy their silence? Buy their departure from your life, as if they were nothing more than a bad investment? Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but Judge Judy cut her off, her voice growing colder, harder. Did you offer her an apology? Did you offer her empathy? Did you offer her, perhaps, a modicum of respect as a human being? Eleanor stammered, caught off guard. I offered money. That's what people want, isn't it? To be taken care of. She looked genuinely bewildered, as if she truly couldn't comprehend why money wouldn't solve this problem. The audience murmured, a mix of disbelief and anger. This woman was so insulated by her wealth, she had lost touch with reality. Some things, Mrs. Vance, are not for sale, Judge Judy stated, her voice like steel. Dignity is not for sale. A family's peace is not for sale. And the emotional well-being of children is certainly not for sale. And yet, you tried to purchase all of them, didn't you? Eleanor finally began to show real anger. I am simply protecting my family, protecting David, protecting my grandchildren from someone who clearly doesn't understand our way of life. Her voice rose, becoming shrill, losing its cultivated calm. This was the first true crack in her facade of aristocratic indifference. Protecting them, or controlling them? Judge Judy shot back, the question hitting like a thunderclap. Because what I'm hearing sounds a lot like control, a lot like manipulation, and a whole lot like you believe your money gives you the right to dictate every aspect of your son's life, including who he marries and who raises his children. The courtroom buzzed. People leaned forward, captivated by the escalating verbal war. Eleanor, furious, pointed at Sarah. She was a distraction. She pulled David away from his responsibilities. He started prioritizing her, the children, over his career, over the family business. It was unacceptable. The accusation, spat out with venom, exposed the real reason behind the eviction, Eleanor's perceived loss of control over her son. Sarah finally found her voice, a small, trembling whisper. He was finally happy. He was finally seeing his children. You didn't like that he chose us over your endless demands. Her voice broke, tears streaming down her face. It was a devastating reveal, painting Eleanor as a tyrannical mother, not a protective one. The court was stunned. A visible wave of sympathy washed over the gallery for Sarah. Judge Judy watched Eleanor, her expression unyielding. So, let me understand this, Mrs. Vance. Your son found happiness, devoted time to his family, and that was so intolerable to you that you decided to dismantle his entire life, including his marriage and his children's home. The judge's voice was slow, methodical, each word a hammer blow. Eleanor recoiled, but then straightened, a flicker of defiance returning to her eyes. I know what's best for my son, she declared, her voice regaining some of its earlier arrogance, though tinged with desperation. I've built an empire for him. He wouldn't be where he is without me. An empire of what, Mrs. Vance? Judge Judy asked, a dangerous glint in her eyes. An empire of filial subservience? An empire built on emotional blackmail and control? Is that the legacy you're so proud of? The question was a direct assault on Eleanor's core identity, her pride, her very understanding of her success. The audience gasped. This was a psychological destruction, not just a legal one. Eleanor, truly cornered now, resorted to a desperate, petty attack. She's just after his money, your honor. Always has been. A common gold digger. She spat the words, venomous and dismissive. The audience shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the classic, baseless accusation. And what exactly makes you believe that, Mrs. Vance? Judge Judy asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Did she ask for a lavish prenuptial agreement? Did she demand expensive gifts? Or is it simply that she chose to marry your son, and in your world, anyone who marries into your family without your express, absolute approval must be after something? Eleanor scoffed. She came from nothing. She had nothing. What else could she possibly want from David? The callousness of the statement was breathtaking. It was a raw, unfiltered display of class prejudice. She wanted a family, Mrs. Vance, Sarah whispered, her voice gaining a surprising strength through her tears. I loved David. I built a home with him. We had children. That's what I wanted. Not your money, not your social obligations. Her declaration, simple and heartfelt, resonated deeply with the audience. The villain's arrogance was now laid bare as pure, unadulterated snobbery. Judge Judy fixed Eleanor with a stare that could melt steel. So, a woman from modest means, who builds a life and family with your son, is inherently a gold digger? Is that the belief system you operate under, Mrs. Vance? That wealth dictates worth? That love is a commodity to be purchased? Her voice was a low, powerful indictment, not just of Eleanor's actions, but of her entire moral framework. Eleanor was speechless, her jaw slack. This was far beyond what she had anticipated. She had expected to simply dismiss Sarah, to be rubber-stamped by the court. She had not expected to be morally vivisected. Then, Judge Judy turned her attention to the son, David Vance, who stood quietly beside Sarah, looking utterly miserable. He hadn't spoken a word, his face a mask of conflict. Mr. Vance, Judge Judy began, her voice softening slightly, but no less firm. Did you agree with your mother's decision to evict your wife, the mother of your children, from your home? David flinched, his gaze darting nervously between his mother's furious glare and Sarah's tearful face. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. This was the moment. The son, caught between two impossible loyalties, was about to be forced to choose. The audience held its breath. This was the raw, emotional core of the case. David swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. Your Honor, I was pressured. My mother has always been very persuasive. He hesitated, clearly terrified of his mother's reaction. Eleanor stiffened, her eyes blazing with a silent, furious warning. Pressured? Judge Judy repeated, her eyes now fixed on David. Mr. Vance, you are a grown man, a successful professional, I understand. Are you truly suggesting you were pressured into throwing your wife out of her home? Or were you simply too spineless to stand up to your mother? The blunt insult hung heavy, designed to provoke, to force a reaction. The audience gasped. David's face crumpled. The accusation of spinelessness hit him where it hurt. He looked at Sarah, then back at his mother, a profound struggle playing out on his face. This was his chance to break free, or to remain forever a puppet. Your Honor, Eleanor interjected, her voice sharp and brittle. My son is merely distraught. He has been manipulated by Sarah. She turns him against his family. Silence, Mrs. Vance. Judge Judy commanded, her voice like a clap of thunder. The entire courtroom jumped. I am speaking to your son, and he, unlike you, is under oath. Mr. Vance, I asked you a direct question. Did you agree with your mother's actions? David took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at his mother, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something akin to resentment, even hatred, crossed his face. Then, he looked at Sarah, and the raw pain in his wife's eyes seemed to finally solidify his resolve. No, Your Honor. I did not agree. I begged my mother not to do it. I told her it would destroy our family. But she wouldn't listen. She said it was for my own good, that Sarah was holding me back. The words tumbled out, a confession, an admission of his own complicity, but also a desperate plea for understanding. A collective sigh of relief, mixed with continued outrage, swept through the gallery. The truth was finally coming out. Eleanor's face was a mask of pure fury. Her carefully constructed image as the benevolent matriarch was crumbling, piece by painful piece, under the weight of her own son's testimony. And why didn't you stop her, Mr. Vance? Judge Judy pressed, relentless. Why didn't you stand up for your wife, for your children, against this blatant act of cruelty? David's voice cracked. She threatened me, Your Honor. She threatened to cut me off from the family business, to disinherit me. She said if I didn't cooperate, I would lose everything. And she threatened to take the children, to claim Sarah was an unfit mother. His confession was a devastating hidden reveal, exposing the depth of Eleanor's manipulation and control. This wasn't just about property, it was about emotional and financial abuse. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. People were leaning forward, wide-eyed, horrified. This was far darker than anyone had imagined. The villain wasn't just arrogant, she was utterly ruthless, using every lever of power she possessed. Judge Judy, her face grim, slowly turned her gaze back to Eleanor. Mrs. Vance, you threatened your own son with financial ruin, with the loss of his children, if he did not comply with your tyrannical demands to remove his wife from their home. Is that what I'm hearing? Her voice was low, dangerous, a coiled viper about to strike. Eleanor, her face now a mottled red, sputtered. That is a distortion. I merely presented him with the consequences of his poor choices. He was making terrible decisions. Sarah was a bad influence. She was losing control, her carefully cultivated elegance dissolving into raw, panicked anger. The mask was completely off. Consequences, Mrs. Vance? Judge Judy's voice rose, cutting through Eleanor's frantic denial. You call holding your son's livelihood and his children hostage consequences? I call that emotional blackmail. I call that abuse of power. And I call that disgusting. The blunt, moral condemnation from Judge Judy was a devastating blow. The audience reacted with a collective, "Oh," of satisfaction and shock. Eleanor, truly humiliated, tried one last desperate maneuver. My family has contributed greatly to this community, Your Honor. My husband built an empire. We are philanthropists. We employ hundreds of people. You cannot treat me like some common criminal. She was flexing her wealth, her social standing, using it as a shield, believing it would somehow exempt her from judgment. Your philanthropy, Mrs. Vance, does not purchase you immunity from basic human decency, Judge Judy retorted, her voice dripping with contempt. Your family's contributions do not give you the right to destroy another family. And in this courtroom, Mrs. Vance, your money means precisely nothing. You are not above the law, and you are certainly not above moral scrutiny. This was the public humiliation Eleanor had feared, a direct stripping away of her perceived status. Eleanor stood there, rigid with rage, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her eyes darted around the room, as if pleading with an unseen jury of her peers, but finding only judgment and disgust. She had thought her status was impregnable. Judge Judy was proving her utterly, tragically wrong. Now, Mr. Vance, Judge Judy continued, turning back to the visibly shaken son. Since you were coerced into this situation, and it seems you finally have found the courage to speak your truth, what do you want to happen now? Do you want your wife and the mother of your children back in your home? David looked at Sarah, a silent apology in his eyes. He took a hesitant step towards her. Yes, Your Honor. More than anything, I want Sarah back. I want my family back. I was wrong. I was a coward. His voice was choked with emotion, a raw, honest admission that resonated deeply. Sarah's eyes welled up anew, but this time, it was with a glimmer of hope. Judge Judy watched them, a flicker of something almost akin to satisfaction in her gaze. She then turned to Eleanor, her expression hardening once more. Mrs. Vance, you orchestrated this entire debacle. You manipulated your son, emotionally abused your daughter-in-law, and caused immense distress to your grandchildren, all because you couldn't control your son's life. This behavior is reprehensible. She paused, letting her words sink in, twisting the knife. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, pregnant with anticipation. Therefore, Judge Judy continued, her voice rising to a crescendo that sent shivers down spines, I find that Mrs. Sarah Miller was wrongfully evicted from her home. I order that she be reinstated immediately, with full access to the property. Furthermore, I am ordering Mrs. Vance to pay for all of Mrs. Miller's temporary living expenses, any legal fees incurred, and emotional damages, the sum of which will be determined by this court. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers of agreement. It was a clear, unequivocal victory for Sarah, a moral triumph over wealth and manipulation. Eleanor gasped, her face going white. Emotional damages? Your Honor, this is outrageous. My money to pay for this. This fabricated drama? She was incandescent with fury, utterly unable to comprehend the concept of non-financial restitution. Her entire world was collapsing. Outrageous, Mrs. Vance? Judge Judy shot back, her voice now a cold, scathing indictment. What's outrageous is your belief that you could treat people like disposable objects, that you could use your wealth as a weapon to tear a family apart and face no consequences. What's outrageous is your moral bankruptcy, which far outweighs any financial empire you may have built. The judge paused, letting the devastating observation hang in the air. This was pure verbal destruction, tearing down Eleanor's ego brick by brick. You speak of fabricated drama, Mrs. Vance. Judge Judy continued, her voice low and dangerous. But the only drama I see here is the spectacle of a woman so consumed by her own sense of superiority, so drunk on her own power, that she has lost all touch with reality. You confused wealth with character. You confused control with love. And today, Mrs. Vance, this courtroom, this entire world, is seeing the true measure of who you are. This was the ultimate public humiliation, exposing Eleanor's true nature for all to see. Her carefully curated image was shattered beyond repair. Eleanor looked utterly broken, not by sorrow, but by rage and humiliation. Her face contorted, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and impotent fury. She had never been challenged like this, never been stripped bare of her power in such a public, devastating way. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her words, her threats, her money, none of it mattered here. Your Honor, she simply cannot get away with this. Eleanor finally shrieked, her voice hoarse, completely abandoning any semblance of dignity. I will appeal. I will tie this up in court for years. She will never see a penny. Her outburst was a desperate, childish tantrum, further cementing her public disgrace. Judge Judy merely raised an eyebrow, a chilling calm settling over her features. You are certainly free to pursue that, Mrs. Vance. But let me assure you of this. The facts will remain the same. Your son's testimony will remain the same. And the moral judgment of your actions, Mrs. Vance, will remain the same. You may have all the money in the world, but you cannot buy back dignity you never possessed. You cannot buy back the respect you so clearly don't deserve. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, almost reverent. This was the moral victory, not just for Sarah, but for every person who had ever been underestimated, bullied, or dismissed by someone wielding power and wealth. Sarah, tears still streaming, now stood a little taller. David, his face stained with tears, reached out and gently took her hand. It was a small gesture, but a profound one, signifying a shift, a potential new beginning, forged in the fires of public humiliation and judicial scrutiny. Bailiff, Judge Judy said, her voice cutting through the silence, escort Mrs. Vance from the courtroom. The order was delivered with quiet finality, an undeniable statement of absolute authority. Eleanor stood frozen, as if she hadn't heard, her eyes still blazing with impotent fury. Did you hear me, Mrs. Vance? Judge Judy asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I said, escort her out. The bailiff moved, a silent, imposing figure, towards Eleanor. For a moment, it looked like she might resist, might lash out in one last, desperate act of defiance. But then, something in Judge Judy's cold, unwavering gaze seemed to penetrate her rage, something that conveyed the absolute futility of further resistance. The ultimate power had shifted, definitively. Eleanor Vance, the once untouchable matriarch, was now merely a defeated litigant, her pride shattered, her authority stripped away in front of a captivated audience. She turned, a ghost of her former self, and walked out of the courtroom, head bowed in public disgrace. The tension in the room, which had been suffocating just moments before, slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a collective exhalation. A sense of justice, raw and deeply satisfying, filled the air. Judge Judy had frozen the courtroom, not with a gavel, but with the icy precision of her words, dismantling an empire of arrogance and reminding everyone that in her court, character, not cash, was the true measure of a person. And the story of Eleanor Vance, who thought money could buy anything, would forever be etched as the day Judge Judy's silent fury taught a powerful woman the true, devastating price of her own arrogance. It was a lesson the entire world would watch and never forget.